the Loughborough University School of Business and Economics organised a conference to establish the facts related to international trade arrangements after Brexit. The conference heard from a range of academic and practitioner experts.
The UK needs a deal more than the EU does because EU trade matters more to the UK than vice versa. So unfortunately the UK is in a weaker negotiating position in terms of needing a deal, particularly with the 2-year time limit on Article 50 negotiations. It's not really feasible to get a long-term trade agreement during that 2-year period, so there are going to need to be some transitional arrangements in place, and finding transitional arrangements that minimise the disruption is going to be very important for the UK.
The real challenge is settling an agreement with the European Union for our trade with them. They are our biggest market. They are rich, close, very similar to us. We will always trade a lot with them. We have very, very good access to the European market at the moment, and nothing that you can negotiate in the ordinary course of events under WTO comes close to that.
A number of people focus on the very large firms and what they might do, and a large investment bank might move a few hundred people. It's actually in the mid-range and the small firms that the problems exist. An Australian, a Brazilian, a Chinese bank who set up in London as their hub to Europe now finds itself in a position where it needs to have perhaps 27 bilateral arrangements out of London, or it can move its headquarters and have a single arrangement amongst the 27 remaining members and an extra one with London. And I think these are the things that we need to think about as we're going forward.
Brexit is one of those huge uncertainties for the automotive industry. The industry is very heavily integrated with Europe. The supply chains cross borders. There are big investment decisions coming up. And the industry wants some answers pretty quickly about the nature of the future trading relationship, but also how regulation will be affected. So the industry is changing. We're shifting towards electric cars, autonomous cars. Regulation will become a bigger issue in the industry because of that. How are we going to cooperate with Europe over that in the future? Some big uncertainties. The industry wants some answers.
Our analysis suggests that we'll end up with a fall in export volumes, but this will also translate into a fall in GDP and people's living standards as a result of Brexit. The level of these depends on whether or not we have a WTO type example or a free trade agreement, with WTO being much more harmful for households than say a free trade agreement with the European Union.
I mean, there are some issues which worry everybody in the city. So another one is employment. So something like 10% of city workforce are EU nationals who've come into London to work, and obviously there's big concerns about, can they ensure that those people feel they're still welcome in the UK? Can they still get skilled people from the European Union once we've left? So that's a particular concern for everybody.
In financial services, I think many people who voted Remain either regret it or say, well, now that the deal's done, let's make it work. The city has always been a place in which innovation in markets and technology and so on has worked very well. I think they're working around that. I think they're preparing for a period of prolonged uncertainty. Whether there's an interim period or whether there's a straight, as it were, fall off the cliff Brexit, I think that they're preparing for that. They're taking out appropriate insurance policies. I don't think people are making premature decisions. So I think the argument is a long way to run yet. But one thing I would say from the point of view of Britain is that London is really a European asset. And I think if I were negotiating, certainly information that I'm getting is that it's important to emphasise on both sides, both the negotiators on this side and negotiators on the other side, that keeping London strong and vibrant is in the best interest of the European economy, whether or not the UK is part of the EU.
The UK economy is structured very differently from the rest of the economies of the European Union. First of all, we're the only economy that is so reliant on services, not only in terms of GDP, 80% of GDP, 80% of exports are services. Services are uniquely damaged by regulatory protection and by behind-the-border barriers. Germany, for example, is much more manufactured goods, and so they're much more concerned with tariffs and border measures than we are. So what this does, though, for the UK economy is it also gives us fewer defensive interests. So we don't have the same defensive interests in agriculture that France does. We don't have the same defensive interests in terms of domestic manufacturing that some of the other continental countries do. And if you are a country with relatively few defensive interests, very strong offensive interests in terms of services access, which is a hugely difficult area, then you should negotiate. You know, it is better for you to negotiate by yourself yourself in order to get deals with other countries?
Biggest problem at the moment is we don't know. There are so many possibilities. There are three groups of unknowns. One is what the UK wants and what is prepared to do. Secondly, we don't know what the European Union, they will react to that. And thirdly, we don't know how the rest of the world will react to that. And they're all sort of interlinked in various ways. And maybe one of the key questions at the moment is the UK itself. It will need to crystallise some kind of position of what it wants, and that doesn't seem to be appearing at the moment.
Brexit is a phenomenal opportunity to reposition the UK in a changing and growing global economy. Also, to make the maximum opportunity from Brexit, we need to combine our global approach alongside a new domestic policy agenda. So it's combining that domestic policy agenda that effectively rewards the regions and those who voted for Brexit, who need to see a change in the UK economy, at the same time having a good relationship with the EU and positioning ourselves with the fast-growing economies such as China, India, and of course the US as well.